I also don't think you could go wrong with a book where they're killing Ku Klux Klan members. Like,
Yeah.
that's
That
pretty
shouldn't be
metal.
controversial. It's like how like if Inglorious Bastards was made today, people would hate it, even though it's like a whole movie about killing Nazis, which like we used to celebrate and now we don't for some reason.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Literary Liberation Podcast. Today, we will be discussing, analyzing, and reviewing Ring Shout by p.djeli Clark. I believe that's how you pronounce the name. Don't forget, there's a link below to sign up for our free newsletter for more information and updates about us in the podcast. For more content outside of the podcast, please check out our Instagram and TikTok at Literary Liberation and Twitter X at LitLib Podcast. I'm your co-host Mariah, and you can find me at Hungry Rye on all social media platforms.
And I'm your co-host Kristen, and you can find me at KRXXTXN on all social media platforms. Or you can follow me on Instagram at TensTBR to see what I'm reading.
It's the debut of Kristen's Bookstagram account. It's very cute. Kristen's doing a very good job.
I only have like 3 posts. I'm not posting that much. It's hard to take aesthetic photos when you don't have anything aesthetic in your house. Yeah. So you did some research on the Mr. p.djeli Clark, Mr. Clark.
He's born in Queens, New York. He's the author and novel of Masters of Jinn, which is a book I have been seeing circulate on like Fantasy Book Talk. I didn't realize it was the same author that wrote Ring Shout, so that kind of really lured me personally into wanting to read Ring Shout sooner. His books have won or have been nominated for several big award ceremonies that I've heard of. I have heard of Hugo and Nebula. I haven't heard of Sturgeon, so I don't quite know what that is.
I don't even know what like those are either, though, for real. Like, I don't know anything about book awards.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like the book equivalent to like the Oscars or what.
I have no idea.
We'll have to look more into this when they come around.
Yeah. Okay.
He's got other novellas besides Ring Shout, The Black God's Drums and The Haunting of Tramcar 015. And I guess he also posts his online stories or short stories on Tor.com. Another one I haven't seen, and some other
Tor.com I think is like a publisher. I think that's like a publishing thing. Like
oh, it is, because I know I have
they have like the little mountain
and they have Tor on them.
Yeah, I think that's like the mountain logo.
Yeah, it's like a mainstream, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And he's also on Twitter. Blog is the Disgruntled Haradrim.
Mariah's really done her research.
Clearly, I should have. Next time I do this, I'm gonna have to put like pronunciation guides next to the words, and I think it's gonna do me a solid in the future.
But
so
I mean, so
overall,
as an author, he hasn't had any controversies. Mariah did most of the research, so
I try. I do what I normally do. I take to Twitter, I take to Reddit, because usually you can find a lot of interesting things about authors on those platforms.
Or if you go on TikTok, you can like look up the author's name. TikTok too. TikTok, like you just look up the author's name and like controversies, and then usually something will pop up if there is actually something.
But relatively unproblematic. I can't find anything, which is very strange. Normally I can find like 1 or 2 things, but I don't know if it's because he's a smaller author. Yeah, but nothing. I know that Ring Shout has garnered a lot of attention on Book Talk. In particular, I remember seeing
and Masters of Jinn is also popular on Book Talk. And like the fantasy side.
Books. Yeah, they're both books that Chris and I have seen floating around. So, other than that, that's about it for the author.
Yeah.
So, Ring Shout, in particular, has pretty decent reviews. I was surprised that even though like it has a solid 4.0 rating with 34,000 reviews, I thought it had a lot more reviews going into it just because of how often I was seeing it recommended on Book Talk, but also it might have been just a hyper niche subsection of Book Talk that recommends this, because it's not like mainstream Book Talk material in the sense that it is a very like politically charged book, I suppose. Like it's a speculative fiction, like historical fiction, fantasy. It's really interesting. But the overall plot summary is that in 1915, The Birth of a Nation comes out, which is true. Like this movie did come out, and it was used by like the KKK, and this group of like black witches are banded together on a quest to eradicate the Klans members who have taken this film and used it as a means of not only radicalizing the white masses, but also turn them into literal demons. So you're just following around with the main character, Marcy. I believe that's how you say her name.
Maurice.
Oh, Maurice. All right.
Maurice is how you say it.
Maurice Bordeaux and her fellow resistance fighters. It's very interesting. It's a short story.
It's so short. It's only like 180 page.
A very quick read, but I think it's very impactful with the content.
It is really short. It's definitely something that you could read in one sitting. I personally didn't. I don't think you did either. I know you did a big chunk in one sitting. I think the most I read was maybe 70 pages in one sitting, which is like half of it. I finished
it in 2. I got a little excited. It was the vibe when I don't know, I think it was last month. I really wanted to read this book, and then I started getting into it, and there was parts I wanted to talk to Kristen about, and I knew that Kristen wasn't going to start reading it until March, so I had to set it down and wait.
Well, because
now we finally have it.
I wanted to read it closer to whenever we were actually discussing it, because I am somebody who, as soon as I finish reading a book, anything about it is pretty much gone from my brain. Like, I forget, like, except for, like, the major plot points, anything small that happens within a book, it's gone, which is why I'm so easily able to, like, reread books that I've just read, like, a year ago, you know, because after a year, I've read so much other stuff, and it's not in my brain. So I didn't want to read this, like, in February, and then us not talk about it until it's the end of March now, whenever we're recording this, and I don't think this is going up till April. So I wanted to make sure it's fresh on my mind, especially with it being so short. I could easily have drowned it out with other things that I read, because just the way my brain works, you know?
Yes. Kristen reads books different than I do. I can't reread books unless it's been like 10 years.
Not me. I've read Coraline like 3 years in a row.
Yeah, you know what it's like? It's like in Doctor Who, like when they see the silence and they have to like, keep tallies because they forget as soon as they look away.
Yeah, that's me with any book. Like, any of these books that are on my shelves, I could be like, oh, this is my favorite book of all time. What happens in it? I don't know. Stuff.
It was just a vibe. I knew it when I was reading it.
So I think that's okay. I can't do what Mariah does and like remember every little detail. But also Mariah forgets so many details, because whenever we were doing Six of Crows and Shadow and Bone, Mariah would be like, I don't know what happened. So
true.
At least I admit my wrongs. But I'm actually surprised it only had 34,000 reviews on Goodreads, because I swear I've seen it like everywhere. Like, I've seen multiple TikTokers that I follow talk about it, but then it's also like, I think it could be because of the specific like side of book talk that we're on, like,
yeah, because like this book,
not the side,
like I said, like I'm pretty sure, because mainstream book talk, like Colleen Hoover books and all of that jazz, even though we like repeatedly bring up a lot of these authors like Coho, Penelope Douglas, SJM, like they're intentionally like politically ambiguous or apolitical in their writing, whereas this is the complete opposite. Which it surprised me when I see other books like Babel or The Poppy War get so much traction, because those are also very, very political. Yeah. And I know that R.F. Huang's books have gotten significantly more traction. So hopefully after this, because this is different than our normal videos, normally we're talking shit, this is actually like a really solid book to discuss and analyze. I don't know if you looked at any of the comment section, or not comment section, I'm thinking the Goodreads reviews.
I did not look at any of the reviews. Also because a lot of the times, because I hate reading reviews for people that I don't know and I don't like where I don't know if, like, we have the same tastes in books and stuff like that. Like, the only time that I look at reviews are if they're, like, my friends on Goodreads or if I follow them on Goodreads. If I don't follow them, if I don't know them, I'm not checking out their review. You know?
You know what? Honestly, I think that's a fair way of going about it. But I do, because I'm a hater to my core, because I'm so curious when people, like, if I love a book, it gets like a 5-star rating. I'm going to the 1-star reviews and I'm looking at these people's profiles and I want to see what they're also rating, like 5 stars, if they're rating my favorite book a 1-star. You know,
You do
it's
that.
just like
I
I
don't do
can't
that.
understand. I do. I can't stand it. It drives me crazy because I need to understand, like, what they find in a book to make it a 5-star book when I see a book and it's perfect. And usually it boils down to, like, media literacy and, like, their overall politics. Because there's
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes I read a book and, like, they'll be, like, massive, like, George Orwell fans or, like,
Yeah.
something fucking weird. They always get me. So the general, like, praise for this book is people like the originality. They thought it was really action packed, and the overall representation of the characters, because it is an incredibly diverse cast of
Mm-hmm.
characters that are presented. But the criticism was very strange, and, like, I'm curious your interpretations of the criticisms, because I don't think we have discussed our overall thoughts with this or how you ended up rating it. Because one of the criticisms is, like, losing track of the plot. Did you feel this was applicable? Yes or no?
I don't think the plot was ever lost in many ways because, I mean, I ended up rating it 4.5 stars technically on Storygraph and then 5 stars on Goodreads because that rounds up. Just because, for me personally, my criticism is not because I didn't like the book and that's why I took away half stars. It's because I wish there was so much more in it where I could easily read, like, a 500-page book of this and I would have devoured it in, like, a week or something. And I'm somebody that
I feel very similar.
I'm somebody that prefers longer books and more, like, I'm not saying substance, but more like
Lore heavy books.
material, I guess you could say, where it's not like lacking substance. I feel like the plot is there and things like that. I just wish there was more for me to consume, I guess, in a way where I feel like it let me down because it was so short that way, where I wish I could be in this
But are
world
there
more.
any, like, novellas that you truly enjoy, like, off the top of your head?
No, but I also don't read novellas, like, really. Like, I mean, like, I rated, like, Demon in the Woods by Leigh Bardugo. Of course, I always have to mention my girl every time. But I think that might be my highest. That's, like, the closest thing to, like, a novella. And I read the graphic novel for it, so it had, like, a little bit more, I guess you could say, because the illustrations could tell the story more, because I think the actual story is only like 20 pages, but then the graphic novel ends up being over 100. And I enjoyed that, but I also think it's because I already knew the world and things like that, and because it's already had what I wanted, where I had, like, I've read Shadow and Bone and Six of Crows, so I already knew, like, the world building and things like that, where this, I felt like you kind of had to have, like, not like a basis in history, or at least US history, but you do kind of have to have an understanding of it. If you're somebody that is, I would say, even, like, liberal or, like, especially right-wing, they're not going to like this book because they're already so lost in their own heads with their hatred. And I know this is, like, what that critiques and stuff like that, but that's something that I think that's why I can see it getting a lower rating from stupid people, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, but the thing is that with a lot of the criticism this book was receiving, a lot of it was people who were, like, claiming to be progressive or, like, supporting the cause, but they just, like, thought the story was, like, all over the place or convoluted, or it was just too short. Some people even said that, like, the amount of characters was overwhelming and they weren't, like, developed enough,
I don't
which
think
I
there
can
was
see,
even
like,
that
definitely,
many
like,
characters for real. There's just, like,
no, not really.
Sadie, how did you say her name again?
There was Cordelia, which is Chef,
Jeff, yeah.
Nana, the Ku Kluxes,
Maurice.
Molly, Emma Krause. Like, a lot of these people, though, Maurice. A lot of these people, though, that get brought up, like, these characters, they are only in it for a little bit. Like, they don't,
But
in
I
my
mean,
opinion, they're side characters. They don't
there's
need
only 180
nuances.
pages, you know? Like, they're not the main character in any way. I mean, the only people. And I think that's why, and we can get more into it whenever, like, we get into the spoiler zone and stuff, because there are, like, critiques that I have with that. But I also don't think it's just because they're all I don't think that makes the characters overwhelming in a way. Like, I feel like every character, like some of them, like some of like Molly's people, I feel like were like irrelevant to name, but that doesn't make it lose any, like, make me not like it. I feel like it tries to make you more immersed because there's more characters to have. And like there's Michael George and stuff. Like I feel like he was relevant. And I felt like he had adequate characterization for a short novel. But I would just say that we would say to read it. Especially if you identify yourselves with any types of like Marxist feminists, intersectionality feminists. What's the word for it?
Like, yeah, intersectional feminism. Yeah. If you like believe in like abolishing, you know, like white supremacy and like dismantling like these oppressive ideologies, I think you'll really enjoy it. And I do think like ultimately like this book, it's not going to be in place of like learning history, but it's more so going to be, I think it'd be like a good like book club book to talk about history like broadly, especially if you're more principled in your, I don't know, like your liberation ideology that you like support, and you know more about US history that isn't like taught. This would be like a good talking point, where you could just kind of dissect it and talk more broadly with your friends and family and kind of build them up and help like awaken their class consciousness.
Yeah, but
so
I think
we both gave it 5 stars.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I think it's definitely something, like, if you're listening to this, like, Marxist podcast, I think it would be something, if you actually, like, are interested in our opinions and things like that, then you would enjoy this book. But I do think that if you're someone that is more right-wing, which I don't know if we have any right-wing listeners or anything like that, but anybody that I think that doesn't maybe necessarily, like, know the nuances of, like, history and, like, the way that, like, Black people were actually treated, like, in the 1920s and the 1930s under Jim Crow and stuff like that, where if you just have, like, a middle school level basis where, like, you learn, like, oh, yeah, we had this, but after 1964, it was gone, then you probably won't appreciate this novel for what it is, or this novella, whatever you want to call it. But I don't think we have any listeners like that, so I wouldn't say not read it. Unless you are somebody that is trying to learn to maybe be more principled in your ideology, maybe you should do a little bit of research of actual, like, Jim Crow South and things like that before you go into this novel.
I also don't think you could go wrong with a book where they're killing Ku Klux Klan members. Like, that's pretty
that shouldn't
metal.
be controversial. It's like how, like, if Inglourious Basterds was made today, people would hate it, even though it's like a whole movie about killing Nazis, which, like, we used to celebrate and now we don't for some reason.
Well, actually, they make some decent points, you know. I am a cool centrist.
I'm very smart.
Like... All right, let's get into the spoilers.
So we can go into the spoiler review. I mean, I don't know what you have to say about it. I know, like, why I have, like, a big critique that is, like, my only critique, which I think is what made it overall 4.5 star for me, actually, and it was the death of Sadie, because I felt like it's supposed to be heartfelt, and I can get the feeling of it there, but I felt personally I didn't get to spend enough time with Sadie's character and how she was. And I know that if I got, like, 100 more pages with her, I would have probably been crying over her death, and I could have, like, actually, like, felt it in my soul. But I just feel like, for me personally, because she died on page, like, 70 or something, it didn't relevant.
No, I can understand that, and I don't think it's, like, it's not even a hard critique. I feel like that's a pretty soft critique, just, like, wanting more, like, character development for people that authors are wanting to, like, kill off, so that they have more of an impact on readers. I'm sure some readers probably, I don't know, it did seem like in the 5-star reviews, like, people did feel, like, emotionally connected with Sadie. I wasn't one of those people either, so...
I mean, I felt very
emotionally... It was
sad. So, like, Marcy, I felt emotionally connected to her, which makes sense. It was all from her perspective. And even though it was, like, first-person perspective, I felt like I was able to connect with more of the characters, too, because I felt like I don't feel like she was a very unreliable narrator, which I feel like is something that happens a lot whenever you get first-person perspective. And I really like that you could hear her accent like in your head as you were reading. And I especially somebody that lives in the South, like I know people that talk like this. My family talks like in that very Southern way. Like my stepdad calls the toilet the commode. Like that's how South we are. And so it felt very refreshing to be able to hear like, I don't know, that in like a way that didn't feel like it was like tokenized, or even just like all the time you'll read books where they'll be like people will have accents, but it's like so over the toply done that it sounds stupid.
You know what? And this is so true, because like when we read Butcher and Blackbirds last month, the main male character is supposed to be Irish, but it doesn't ever translate. So, and I have a problem in other books where they have accents and then it's just written in a way where you just like don't hear it in your head. I think that's a really hard thing to get across unless you're listening to like an audiobook. But this does it in such a way. It's phenomenal.
But people were complaining about the audiobook. A
lot of people were complaining about the audiobook, and
we didn't listen to the audiobook, so we can't really have like, what's that word, like a rat in the race or something. I don't know what it is. Like, you know what's that saying?
Yeah.
Whatever.
You can't throw your hat in the ring, or
whatever. Like but my main thing with the accents is Nana Jean, and I don't know anything about like the Gullah culture and stuff like that, so this is obviously like ignorance on my part because I don't understand. Like, I don't know if it's supposed to be like where like the Gullah people are from, but I know that's like what Nana Jean is. But like, and I think it's kind of intentional too that like her accent is so heavy that you can't understand what she's saying half the time. And I was in one of those places where I would get kind of frustrated because I'd be like trying to read it. Like I'd read her lines multiple times, say it out loud, and I still didn't know what she was trying to get across. And that's one of the things that frustrated me. That's also because of my ignorance and me not knowing anything about the culture or that language, you know?
Yeah, definitely reading it out loud helped me.
Yeah,
because sometimes I'm reading, I'm like, what is this? And then I'd say it out loud. I was like, okay, I can hear it now.
I could hear like some words, but then there was like some sentences where I was just like, I'm gonna just go on and hopefully it's not important that I know what this line is, you know, because some of them would just be so.
And I appreciate the author because even like the responses from other people, if you weren't able to understand what she was saying, you at least got the gist of it because they would reply in more nuance so that you could understand, like, oh, this is probably what she was saying.
Yes. Yeah, I appreciate that because I feel like there's definitely been times where I've read in a novel where they'll have somebody with like a strong accent and they write it out like in that way in the accent and you don't know what they're saying, but then nobody responds or something, so you're just like, okay, I guess I don't know what they're talking about, you know. So I feel like I was able to get the gist most of the time, but that's just something that I can understand people becoming frustrated with because if you're not I didn't even know about like Gullah or anything like that either before I read this.
I have never heard of it either.
So I think that's something that I think is really nice to be able to like. That's one thing that's so great about like fiction in general too, is that you're able to still learn about stuff that even though this is like historical fiction and like a fantasy setting and stuff, you still can learn so much about different cultures and things like that that you would not have been introduced to in like if I chose to pick up Sarah J. Maas or something like that, you know?
Yeah, where it's like rooted in some reality where readers are able to build on that and like, oh, I don't know what this is, and take the opportunity to go educate themselves, which I imagine a lot of people that are reading this are the type to do that. So I thought that was kind of ingenious and how like this book was constructed.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely reminds me of like Babel and stuff because like Babel is sort of like the same like historical fiction fantasy setting and stuff like that, where I learned so much about like the Opium Wars and more contextualize it, even though like obviously I knew like about the Opium Wars from like high school history and stuff like that, but you never get to really see how it affects like people personally in like your regular history classes versus like even like a fictionalized version of it gives you the idea of how someone could possibly be like viewing that through their lens, where you don't get that perspective normally, especially in school and things like that. So I think if you like Babel, you would definitely like this. I think that's something.
Yeah, it's like finally the first book that we have read this year that has given like a similar vibe to Babel, but just maybe not as like deep.
Where
it's not, because it's just a quick read.
Yeah, especially where it's just like more just about like killing racists and killing Ku Klux Klan members, where I think Babel almost has a more like nuanced and like way deeper like thought and stuff like that because of like it also has, 400 more pages than this book had to get its point across,
And I really do think that the concept behind it had the potential to be about had it been longer.
I think definitely if it was like it definitely could have been a Babel. Where that's why that's why I didn't want to rate it like 5 stars, because it's not Babel, and it didn't since it wasn't as long. And I know you're a lot more lenient with your ratings than I am, so I think that's probably why where our main difference is. But we both can elevate it up to a Babel level, but for me it just falls short because I felt like I couldn't connect in that way because it was so much short. Which if I think that's I don't think this is a criticism to p.djeli Clark either. I think that's just what he wants to do, because I think all of his other books are really short too, except for maybe Master of Jinn, and I think there might be a second one to that, I want to say, or there's going to be or something.
Either a second or a third.
Something. I think it's a series or a duology or something. And I think those are longer, but those are true high fantasy from my understanding, versus his other novels are not super high fantasy, so they don't need to be as long. But I feel for me personally, they could always benefit. Sometimes less is more, but personally for me, I never see less as more. I always see it as more is more,
But I'm gonna say, in defense of my 5-star rating, because you say I'm lenient, I cannot, in good faith, just knock a book down when they really positively represent Bolsheviks, because that doesn't ever happen.
Yeah, because we have
that
Emma.
Was incredible.
Yeah,
Emma Krauss.
Yeah, where she's a German woman who is widowed. I don't know why her husband died. I think the flu or something, Spanish flu maybe. It's that time. I was very confused whenever I first started reading it, because since I assumed that it was Jim Crow, I thought it was going to be more 1950s, 60s, but then I realized that it was Prohibition era. Because you learn that pretty quick but I think I just, from my preconceived notion of it, I just assumed it was going to be 50s, 60s, because I feel that's when the KKK is more relevant in our history, I think.
Yeah, because this is sitting at the conception.
Yeah, right at the beginning.
The KKK.
Mm-hmm.
Which is really interesting, because a lot of books that I think that's where we're coming from is it's always based around the 1940s, 1950s, and this being in 1915, which is a very
I think it ends up taking 1920s
time in U.S. history. Yeah, because it's World War I was happening around this
because
time.
Chef served in World War I, which is interesting. Because I don't even know, I don't know that much history about World War I and stuff like that, but I didn't know if they would actually let, black women serve in the military.
They needed bodies.
I'm sure they did, yeah.
Anybody to help the cause.
Mm-hmm. But I feel that's something that
fairly lenient.
But you don't really get to learn about, that. You always learn about, men being taken from their families sort of thing. And I'm sure with how it was, I'm sure it ended up being, Chef volunteered to do it, where it wasn't, drafted. But
yeah.
I think it's still interesting in that way, that's something that you definitely don't see in history or represented in any way. Black women in the military. Not that usually it's a good thing, but I think World War I is a different story rather than modern day wars.
Yeah, it is a materially different war, and I appreciate it for that,
mm-hmm.
for what it was, and the technology, what they had, and I think it tied in so nicely with the Birth of a Nation, which I think I heard
I've heard about it.
You knew more about it than I did. I took the leap to watch it, and I was sending Kristen screenshots of this silent film, just to understand the history behind it. And when you watch that movie, it makes so much more sense why I can't remember what they end up the Ku Kluxes and their grand high wizard were centered around that
Cyclops
film, because the vibes of it were exactly what was presented in the book. It is the movie that you would imagine present. The author did such a good job at picking that, and the overall arching themes in this, right, is that it was used as a tool for the KKK, basically making it seem black people, once they won the vote,
the right to vote,
even though we know that wasn't the right to vote, right, legally,
yeah,
quote unquote, they didn't actually have it, but the country just goes into like anarchy, and then Robert E. Lee or whatever, I can't remember what his name was.
That's the
I think it was
Confederate.
Robert E. Lee.
That's the Confederate girl, if that's who you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that was the main character of the movie, though. Like, it was weird.
I've never seen it, so I can't vouch for it. I just heard
there's a lot of blackface. I don't recommend watching it, but it's interesting if you've never watched it. Just like see this piece of like U.S. history, because it's just as bad as you would think, and they really do play into like the myth of the black rapist and all of these tropes that you read about in like history books, like especially like Marxist and like civil rights history books.
A birth of...
But it's like basically like every racial stereotype, and like I can see like why the white masses would have like rallied behind this film, because they felt so disenfranchised, even though like it's just a bunch of like a white savior complexes trying to like save society and democracy. But I thought it was interesting also how they tied in like the Grand High Wizard, which is like the leader of the KKK, like making him like a literal wizard to transform
a cyclops,
like the clans into demons, and then have them turn into like a cyclops thing, which I don't know if the cyclops is like actually like anything relevant in like clans lore. I'm not that familiar with it.
I don't know that much.
I know what I need to know.
Yeah, I don't really know that much. Like, I know like the leader or whatever is like the Grand Master or whatever, and I know Joe Biden used to be hanging out with one of the old ones, if we want to talk about that. But I don't know.
Are you surprised?
No, but I'm just saying it's interesting. And of course, liberals are like, it was a different time. But I don't know. Well, because it was very interesting, because like the Butcher Clyde is like the main antagonist and villain of this book, and it's not even like that he was actually like a white person either. He was just like they're like aliens or something that like have taken over. They want to like, I don't know what you call it.
They want to create like a hive mind for power.
Like, I don't know. Like, they're like some type of like aliens that like, and that's I think this is another thing that definitely could have been expanded more on if we had more pages to do so, where we could have actually understood, because they're like supposed to be like aliens that like they feed off of hate and like violence and stuff like that, and that like what powers them to take over the world, question mark, the earth, question mark, the universe, question mark, don't know. And then that's why like I feel like his offer is so but like so compelling to Maurice, because she like talks about how like black women and black people have never had any power, especially in like the United States and stuff like that. And then like there's like a reason why like the aunties saw her saying yes to their offer so many times, because it actually is a compelling offer, where she thought it was just going to be like bring her family back, and then they're like, no, it's that we could give you everything you wanted, the power that you've always wanted, and like that. So,
but also the aunties are like these fox face ethereal beings as well.
Yes,
very
but we
confusing.
Don't know that much about them either, and that's why it's something that like, if there was so much more, if there was like an extra like 200, 300 pages, it could have been chef's kiss, perfect, because you would have gotten all the context that you needed. Instead of a lot of it, I feel like you kind of do have to infer, you know?
Yeah, it's up for interpretation for sure.
And I feel like I don't like that in my book. I like, wake up, sheeple, not me. I'm staying asleep. I guess I'm a sheeple, where like somebody like this tells me what to think, and I'm gonna think it, you know?
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
You know, like a pretentious kind of like philosophical read.
It just makes me, I think whenever you leave too many things up to interpretation, it gives people the opportunity to misconstrue it in the wrong way, and I think that's something that's can be not necessarily for like this book, but I think it can be problematic for like other novels and other people's works and things like that. And you already see it happen so often in other people's works, where they like their entire like argument gets misconstrued in so many ways. It happens to Marx.
I did see someone like critique this book because of the ambiguous nature of the Ku Kluxes and like their alien form, and like where like the hate derives from, where they think like I don't know, like the hatred is kind of like an enigma, like it kind of just exists without like a real like class analysis, like it's not based in like a class-based society. Do you think that perhaps that's a fair criticism because it's kind of obscure and it's not straightforward with like the development of white supremacy historically in conjunction with the creation of capitalism in the United States as like a settler colony?
I mean,
it's a big question, I'm sorry.
Well, because like there is a section in this that they do talk about like the white supremacist power of it, where basically in the book I think they end up just saying that like the reason why they hate so much is because they hate things that are different from them. It's like Butcher Clyde's like ending monologue. Oh, here it is. You see, the hate they give us is senseless. They already got power, yet they hate those over who they got control, who don't really pose a threat to them. Their fears aren't real, just insecurities and inadequacies. Deep down, they know that. Makes their hate like watered down whiskey. Now, your people, his eyes light up and he steps closer. Y'all got a good reason to hate. All the wrongs been done to you and yours, a people who have been whipped and beaten and hunted and hounded, suffered so grievously at their hands. You have every reason to despise them, to loathe them for centuries of desperations. That hate would be so pure, so sure, so righteous, so strong. Where I think that like kind of makes it boil down to where it's just like, oh, like, and I don't know any like super racist people either, so I don't even know, like, I don't know the philosophy on why people are racist and hateful in so many ways. I don't know if you know why or anything like that, because that's just something that's never been, I could never comprehend in my mind. Is just even just like disliking someone because of any of those like superficial reasons, especially because like race is like a social construct in many ways, especially here in the United States. And so I just don't understand, and I don't think I'm like the right person maybe to even say on why that I think that like the white people like decided to start the Ku Klux Klan, like even if like I watch this movie, because I always think about how like living in that time, I can't even comprehend like just like being so racist to where like you couldn't even let a black person sit next to you or like go into the same restaurant as you. That's just something, and I think that's something because I grew up in a more diverse town, I guess, living in a bigger city in the South, and so there are a lot more like black people and stuff like that. So it's something I could never like comprehend, where it's like, oh, they were not in my classes or anything like that. So I just don't get it, you know, and I don't understand like where it could possibly even come from.
I think part of it, like historically, like the development of like white supremacist ideology, like there's a lot that like occurred, but it does seem to stem from like two main sources. It's like one, by separating the like I'm not a class reductionist, I'm prefacing this, but by being able to like separate the classes, because when you think of like the white indentured servants worked with like the
Irish
black enslaved people.
the Irish people, whenever
Yeah,
they
like
were
they worked
not seen
together
as
and
white.
then but they worked together in this rebellion. I can't remember what the rebellion was called. Forgive me for that. But then after that happened, they realized like the economic ruling classes, it's just like the general like overseeing classes, were able to find that if they were to get like poor white people on their side and be like the slave watchers, the night watchers, like they would keep any like working class solidarity from forming. Um, and then like white people will are like, oh wait, I'm being disenfranchised, so like being able to like step up a little bit even though like they're facing like their own sort of oppression that they aren't able to realize as like labor exploitation,
Mm-hmm.
but like being able to like redirect that frustration instead at the same people that are oppressing the enslaved people. They focus it on like the kind of like micro differences between like working class people. I
Mm-hmm.
can't remember who said it, like you have more in common with like working class people than you ever will with like the economic ruling class. Like there's
Yeah.
some phrase, I can't remember what it is. Again, I'm not a reductionist, but I do think that's relevant, It's just like this general feeling of like disenfranchisement in society. They know something is wrong, and it's easier to point fingers at somebody that looks different than them. I mean, like, oh, well, you have it easier because of like X, Y, and Z, or it's going to take something away from them, but not realizing that it's not. It's benefiting all of the working class. Does that make sense? I don't know.
I understand what you're saying, but I just think that's something that could never, like,
it's
comprehend
so
in my mind, because that, like, all the time that, like, I'm like, I don't understand, like, seeing, like, the differences just because of, like, skin tone, or, like, I understand that I have more in common with, like, my fellow man that's working and being exploited, whether they're white, black, Asian, Hispanic, whatever, versus, I guess, like, a different white person does, and I just don't understand where that disconnect happens, and I guess it ends up being with, like, the propaganda that we're raised in so young and stuff like that. So, like, I understand it, but I also don't think it's, like, I think if more people actually, like, educated themselves on different things and, like, different, like, races and, like, different, like, societies and, like, different areas of the world, they would understand that we're not all that different and things like that. And I think you can always see that too whenever people, all the time, people's favorite argument against communism is that it looks good on paper. You know what I mean? And I think that's, yeah, it looks good on paper because it's actually good if people actually choose to educate themselves on that.
It's like the red pill. Like, I see a lot of with like the cringe lord, like libertarians who are taking the Joe Rogan red pill. They're like, oh my god, my mind is open. But like that is how it feels when you become like class conscious and you're able to like deconstruct all of these harmful ideologies and see like what is actually like the forces that are holding you down in life and not allowing you to achieve your full potential. Like the whole like more people should want to experience that instead of further fall down like the alt-right pipeline where they think like, oh my god, it's actually like these marginalized groups that are the issue, like the reptilian, like that bullshit that they like fall into. It doesn't make any sense.
And I guess
like,
it's because we're like principled and we're like, we actually do like research on things that we like believe in and things like that. And so I guess that's something that we'll never be able to fully comprehend. And I wonder if it could be like a hindrance, because I mean, you grew up more conservative than I did.
But I did grow up in like I live in a sundown town. I think I've talked about this before on the podcast. And I did grow up around like white supremacists, like that, like skinheads and whatnot. So I did hear a lot of that stuff growing up, and it didn't make any sense to me. But also, like the amount of like diversity in my town is very minimal. I think there was maybe 4 black students I graduated with in my class.
That's it was absolutely insane to me, because like even whenever Mariah came here for Louder Than Life, we went to a music festival together, and I felt like that was a very white, like we have obviously like a lot of, there's so many different races and things that live here in Louisville. But like whenever Mariah came, she's like, it's so crazy that there's so many people here and that it's so diverse. And I felt like Louder Than Life is still a very white event. One, because it's like rock music and stuff, which is already like stereotypically white in that way. And then also it's a expensive like weekend pass where, because of like social standings and stuff like that, where a lot more people of color are not able to afford like things like luxuries in that way too, because they're most of the time underpaid, especially in like South of America, because like our minimum wage here is still $7.25, and so you would think that it's still not even, and that's crazy to me that like that is still more diverse than what you live in. Whenever I feel like we could go to
like
other
people
places
here, like more. I live in Oregon. Oh, you live in like Portland. Because like Portland is like up north towards Washington. Like there's a whole rural area underneath, and I'm like on the border of California. Like we're in the middle of nowhere. It's like, and I live in like the city, but it's not the city. Like I didn't realize I did live in a city until I started TikTok.
What are we doing next? The Familiar?
I think the next episode that is getting posted is going to be...
It's The Familiar next, buddy. Let's go!
Yes,
Leave Bardugo!
Lee Bardugo's Familiar. Kristen was very lucky and won a giveaway, so she got an ARC.
The problem
of the
is that
Familiar.
I didn't even win the giveaway. My boyfriend won the giveaway. And because I made him enter the giveaway because I wanted to win the book, obviously. But I didn't even win it. He won it. Isn't that crazy? Because I have it right now.
After
that,
the Familiar will be Priory, I think.
Yes.
As long as everything goes according to plan, I think everything is set.
Yes.
So also, again, don't forget we have a newsletter. We'll be posting the March. I think by the time this is up,
March will already be sent out.
Newsletter will be sent out. Don't forget to follow Kristen's new Bookstagram.
Don't forget to follow Hungry Rye.
Hence TBR. Yeah. Whenever I decide to post. Thank you again for listening to another episode of Literary Liberation. We post bi-monthly episodes on Thursdays, so keep an eye out and follow our Instagram for news updates on when we're going to post our next episode and what exactly it's going to be about.